Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.
John Tomlinson is the company producer for SBC Theatre. SBC stands for Stand and Be Counted, and in 2016 the company became the UK's first theatre company of sanctuary in recognition of its work with, about and for those seeking sanctuary in the UK. John's also associate producer at York Theatre Royal, and he joins me now to discuss his work with SBC as well as his broader production career. John, thanks so much for joining us at British Theatre Guide.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Firstly, could you just tell us a bit about this company, SBC, that you sort of co-founded?
Yeah, so the plotted history goes a little bit like this. 7 years ago, Rosie McPherson, who is a brilliant writer and actor, and I were cast in a show together that was going to Edinburgh, and we had a really good working relationship during that process, and actually wanted to test ourselves, I think, to write something together. So to kind of get our ideas out there as well. So we made a show together, very DIY. We did that at Salford Lads Club. We essentially hired the hall, a great place to develop the first piece of work with all the history that comes with. It went really well. So the show got lots of good turnout in terms of audiences, good response in terms of feedback from programmers and people we'd invited to see it. And we thought maybe we're onto something. Maybe there's something actually about us creating a company that says something about the world that we live in, and we kind of want to reflect our ideas as politically focused people. So that kind of continued, and we developed lots of different projects over the course of the few years. And then in 2015, Hannah Butterfield, who's a brilliant theatre maker, joined us. And it kind of felt like once we had that three, we had so many areas covered between the three of us in terms of the planning, the logistics and strategy, but also the mix of three dynamic people in a room really worked. So that's how it kind of blended together and developed.
So is your role with SBC mostly as a producer then, or do you have a sort of are you a creative producer where you have an input in the rehearsal room, or do you sort of focus on that organisational side?
I think the beauty of the three of us is that we have very specific skills, but actually there's lots of them that we blend together. So actually Rosie and Hannah are as much of a producer of the company as I am. It just helps for other people to understand the kind of roles between the three of us to have those titles. But actually we're all very creative, so we would all be in the rehearsal room together, making stuff, thinking, planning. It's usually me behind the screen doing the spreadsheets, but I'm a sucker for that. But yeah, we're all we multitask all the roles together.
You talked about the kind of developing political nature of your work and your desire to make that politicised theatre together. Can you tell us a bit more about how that's evolved and how it's become this kind of idea of a theatre company of sanctuary?
Yeah, so one particular show, which we're going to talk about in a bit more detail, we started to develop an idea that we wanted to talk about detention centres and making a show about that. Now, that is very political for lots of reasons. So we knew we had to do that very sensitively. So we went to City of Sanctuary, who are a brilliant organisation who work with asylum seekers and refugees, and said, we've got this idea. Before we actually take it any further, we want to talk to you about the details, understand a bit more about what is really happening right now in the world. And they sort of suggested to us, well, maybe there's a way in which we could really work together on it. We can introduce you to some people who you can talk to start the research. But actually maybe there's a way in which one of the people that they work with could be part of the show. So that conversation was really exciting, and I guess at that point we kind of knew that we were onto a different way of making a piece of theatre, because it wasn't just going to be us in a room together devising something. It had to go a different way. So that's when it became very political, because we were in a room with someone who had gone through these particular issues, and we got to know her really well, became obviously very good friends with her, had a great relationship, and it just meant that we had to be political about it. We had to stand up for the stuff that she was telling us, and that's kind of how the piece developed.
And that was a show called Tanya, was
yep.
it? And that was it. The first tour was last year.
Yeah, so we did the first tour in September 2016. So we went through a lengthy process of development for lots of reasons. One, we wanted to make sure that it was the right piece of work, that it was timely, it was interesting, that we had something to say about the world as well, but also to make sure that we could work with Emily and that we could offer her a really safe place as a platform for her voice. So it took a lot longer than another piece of work might have taken, We did lots of kind of developments and work in progress performances of the piece, and then we got it on its feet properly and toured it towards the end of 2016, and we're about to relaunch it. So we've done some festival dates this year in Ipswich and in Sheffield, and then we're about to do 11 performances on tour.
And I mean that was, I saw that show in its sort of first kind of, I guess, major sort of public performance, and it was really striking that, you know, among the cast was this performer who was herself seeking asylum for over 10 years, I think it was.
Yeah, so Emily's story is amazing, and it's one, unfortunately, that a lot of people have gone through. So she represents not just her story, but lots of women who have gone through this atrocious system of seeking asylum. And her being in Yarl's Wood meant that she just had these experiences that not many people have got, because when they come out of that, often they're traumatised and often don't want to speak about this particular issue. And also from the public, it's hard to get inside of those doors. Hence the Panorama, undercover investigation that kind of came out very recently. So it felt like when we had Emily as part of this piece that we had really unlocked what Yarl's Wood is and what it stands for as part of our society. And she's an amazing woman. She's so courageous, so brilliant to work with. I've never been part of a project that's so fun, even though it's a very sensitive topic, because she just has an amazing aura about her. But ultimately, this is a story that we had to tell, and she had to be the biggest part of it.
And where did that sort of urge to tell the story come from? What was the first spark that kind of alerted you to this situation?
So the first spark was Rosie came to me with an article in The Guardian, which was alleging abuse in Yarl's Wood. Now, I'm someone, and so is she, someone who I think we're quite aware, usually, of society and what's going on and kind of particular policies and issues. And this kind of just completely took me by surprise. I was reading something that was happening in Bedfordshire in England that was going on, and I had absolutely no clue. And I was really interested at why I had no clue about it. And then as soon as you start to research about Yarl's Wood, you go on the website and it's very... Look at this lovely safe space where you can come, and it's very much a place of transition and almost feels like some kind of place of sanctuary, actually, when you look at it. The more that you actually investigate and speak to people who have been in there, you realise that it's quite the opposite. And it feels very much like prison, but actually an unregulated prison. So when I read this article from The Guardian, there was a particular sentence in there about this woman that they used inverted commas to say Tanya, because they covered up her actual name, and that was a spark. That was the reason that we started to go on this journey. And it was through political interests of ours individually and as a company. And we toyed with the idea a lot about, do we go down this route, because it could open some doors that we don't necessarily want to open, actually. We're really glad we did. And I'm glad that we knocked on City of Sanctuary door first, because otherwise it could have been a very different situation. So that was the first spark of, actually, as people, we want to investigate what this is. Actually, our way of campaigning is very much going to Yarl's Wood and being part of that protest and signing petitions. But actually, there's so many people that we can get to as a theatre company. We can share this information with them through a piece of drama that will hopefully be interesting, entertaining, but actually will have a really clear take-home message about what we think about this.
Well, yeah, there's a pretty sort of direct instruction in the piece to sort of shut down Yarl's Wood. Is basically sort of one of the take-home messages I took from it. And I'm wondering is that the kind of action? What kind of action your work kind of incites or invites? What kind of response have you had, or what?
I mean, the response that we've had has been phenomenal, really phenomenal, in terms of the people that have come along to see it. I think there's always questions about, well, this is... you're going to do this in a drama space, and the chances of someone having the same opinion of you is very high. And I would counter that with, but actually, did you know about this? Have you spoken to someone who's been through these particular things? If you have, then fine. But now you've met this amazing woman who's got this such courageous story. Now you're armed with actual information. So when there's something in the press, when there's a conversation going on around the dinner table, you've got actual information from someone's direct experiences. And you can challenge that now, and you can come to protests, and you can send letters, you can get in touch with your MP, you can go and volunteer with City of Sanctuary, you can support some of these people by just meeting them and being welcoming and kind of embedding that spirit that we try and enforce with this particular piece. So there's lots of things that we can do, and I think it's an open invitation to continue that conversation, either with us or we'll put people in touch with the right people.
Is there something you can tell us about the other work that you do apart from the staging of these productions?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the touring element of this is only one part of a much wider picture. So at every point during this process, so in rehearsals, in the development of it, we've developed performance talks, so kind of 15-20 minute kind of discussion topics where we can be part of a festival or a conversation to just at least get that platform where people meet Emily, particularly because she's so strong and has such a great presence in a room. And we've developed lots of workshops with young people, with schools and colleges, and there's always post-show discussions after our shows, sometimes pre-show discussions as well. This year we're touring with a sanctuary exhibition, so Spaces of Sanctuary exhibition. So that's just another way for people to kind of engage with these things that we're talking about. So yeah, the actual show is only probably 20-30% of all the other work that goes on around it, and they're equally as important. Us going to a college in Skipton last year, for example, and speaking to a group of 80 or 90 17-year-olds was so important, and for them to ask those questions that they've never been able to ask because they haven't had the opportunity to ask, it was really valuable, and I would say actually was more important than the show that night.
And I suppose that sort of is one way of tackling that kind of comment that often gets levelled at political theatre or politicised theatre, that it's preaching to the choir. It's it's the people who come to see it will be people who are already invested in those issues in question. I suppose if you are taking the work out into colleges or taking the conversation out to other spaces. Yeah,
that's exactly it. And I think that in terms of any kind of piece that you put into a studio theatre, it will attract a certain demographic, and we all understand the detail of that. So I think with something like this, even more so, you're going to attract particular types of people who have thoughts that are similar to you. So yeah, very much part of the whole package is we want to be challenged by people, and we want them to ask that question about actually what else are you doing except taking the show to lovely theatres around the country. So yeah, that's a big part of the work that we do, and often the most interesting.
You're in development for a new production as well at the moment, aren't you? A production called Displace?
Yeah, so Displace is a piece that we started to develop this year, and it centres around a guy called Tafadzwa Mchenje who came to see Tanya actually in Camden last year. So it's a direct response to that piece of work. Now, he was in the audience that night and was visibly upset about what he was seeing, and it was interesting because we talked to him afterwards and sort of had the discussion about, is there anything that was particularly difficult for you to understand, or what kind of caused that reaction. And it turns out that his citizenship was kind of thrown up in the air just before that moment where he saw the show, and he was studying at Goldsmiths University, about to kind of complete his third year. Things were really looking good, and then suddenly he applied to be a British citizen, got rejected, his family got accepted, so he got thrown into this whole world of being part of this Home Office situation now that he couldn't quite compute, because he very much felt British and is as British as me, and suddenly he faced deportation to Zimbabwe, where he has no family, no connections. So we kind of opened up that conversation with him and invited him to get into a rehearsal room. And again, the sparks kind of flew, and we got really excited about him as a performer, because he's very, very physical performer, great with language. And again, it's a personal story at the centre of the next piece of work that we'll do, which will be a very different form to Tanya, we expect, but still has that kind of that central theme of talking about displacement and people's identity in our society.
So what stage are you at with the evolving production at the moment?
So we're at a really exciting stage where we will be touring that piece in September 2018. So we won one of the Bridging the Gap awards, which means that there's a collection of northeast venues that will support us in the development, and we've got dates lined up. So we're looking at how we do that first tour of that and kind of working backwards from there. So yeah, at the point where we're getting really excited to kind of get it back into a rehearsal room and get it on its feet and take it out on tour.
Let's sort of move outwards from your own company and talk a bit about your other work as a producer, just for a little while. You've also trained and worked as a producer at theatres across, particularly the north of England, I believe. Sheffield Theatres, Contact in Manchester, and you're now an associate producer at York Theatre Royal.
Yeah.
What does your role as associate producer entail?
So the role there is, it's 3 days a week, so that's kind of how I balance the two. Sometimes it feels like they're both full-time during particular times. But the role involves 3 main strands, I think. One is producing of projects that are in development with York Theatre Royal, and the big projects that we put on our stages. So they might be in the studio space, or it might be in the main house. So having a kind of handle on the planning and the logistics of that, working with Damien and Juliet and the artistic planning team to kind of develop the right projects for the city that we work in. The second part of the role is playing a part in the programming team, so making sure that we bring in and present the best work that we can, again in our studio, which is 100 seats, and then the main house, which is 750. So having a keen eye on the development of projects, going out there, finding the right product for work that we want to present. There's obviously lots of particularly strong relationships with York Theatre Royal and other producing companies and venues. So making sure that we get the best from what we can.
I don't know whether it was the first production that you worked on here, but certainly one of the first ones was the large-scale community production. Everything is possible.
Yeah. So everything is possible was
quite different from
huge.
SBC theatre productions.
Yeah. So working usually from SBC's point of view with a team of sort of maybe 4 or 5 people in a room, and everything is possible was a huge production, a co-production between York Theatre Royal and Pilot Theatre, that started at the Minster, 120 actors in it from the community, 50-piece choir, tens of backstage volunteers. So that rehearsal room had a very different energy to it, and lots more people. But incredibly important piece of work. Very proud to have been part of making that, because it was very centred around the York story of the suffragettes. Yeah, so it was a great piece to work on.
And what are the shows and companies that you're particularly excited about right now?
So particularly companies that we're programming, can't say too much about the new brochure that's pending, but what I will say coming up is Frantic Assembly are here next week, which is great. Really pleased that we could bring them. I haven't had the conversation a little while ago about them coming to York for the first time, particularly because they're such a brilliant company. The work connects to young people as well in terms of developing them as theatre makers. And so it'd be great to have them. We just had a weekend of live art and performance, so as part of SLAP, so interested about what they're going to do next and how we work with them. There's the big Rose Theatre next year. It will be coming, obviously we'll be in association with that from York's point of view, so that will have a big effect on our summer offer, which I'm excited about. So there's a whole range of particular shows that are coming in that I've kind of developed and worked on with the rest of the team to bring in, which are really exciting.
I don't know how you get time to watch any shows.
Yeah, well, that's the best bit of the job.
Yeah.
Sometimes I kind of say that's work, and it feels like a real pleasure when you see a piece of work that you've kind of brought in or had an involvement in. Yeah, that's the time where you can, even though you are technically working, you can kind of switch off for an hour and just actually enjoy the fact that there's lots of people enjoying their evening watching a brilliant piece of work.
Great. Well, just to say that there is an opportunity again to see Tanya, which is touring throughout November this year, across the north of England and also to Camden People's Theatre towards the end or the middle of November. And Displace is set to tour, as you said, in 2018.
Yeah.
So John Tomlinson, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.